Why is it that two people can face the exact same challenge, yet one crumbles under the weight while the other seems almost untouched? At first, it might seem obvious to blame the circumstances, the job loss, the breakup, the unexpected turn of events. But what if the real cause of suffering isn't out there at all? The Stoics had a profoundly different view. They believed that suffering doesn't come from what happens to us, but from how we choose to interpret it. As the philosopher Epictetus famously said, men are disturbed not by things but by the views they take of them. In this video, we're going to explore exactly what this means and how your internal reactions, not the world around you, are the true source of your pain. By unpacking key Stoic principles, we'll uncover why this ancient philosophy places the power and the responsibility squarely in your hands. Stick around, because what you're about to learn might completely shift the way you understand your own struggles. Imagine you're stuck in traffic, you're already running late, and the cars ahead of you haven't moved in what feels like forever. Your heart starts racing, frustration builds, and then the thoughts come flooding in. Why does this always happen to me? I'm going to be so embarrassed when I show up late. This entire day is ruined. You grip the steering wheel tighter, clenching your teeth, and suddenly, something as simple as sitting in your car becomes a source of misery. Now, let me ask you something. Is the traffic itself the source of your suffering, or is it how you're reacting to it? According to the Stoics, the answer is clear. The traffic, that's just the situation, the event, but the stress, the anger, and the spiral of negative thoughts, that's suffering, and it comes entirely from how you're interpreting the situation. The Stoics believed that while pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. Marcus Aurelius, one of the greatest Stoic philosophers, put it perfectly when he said, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment." What does that mean exactly? Pain is a natural and unavoidable part of life. You might feel physical pain when you stub your toe or emotional pain when you lose a loved one. These are real experiences, and the Stoics didn't deny that. But suffering happens when we add layers of judgment, interpretation, and resistance on top of that pain. It's the story we tell ourselves about what's happening that turns discomfort into despair, inconvenience into outrage, or loss into hopelessness. Think back to the traffic scenario. Without the self-critical thoughts or the imagined consequences of being late, the traffic itself is just traffic, an inconvenience, sure, but not the life-altering catastrophe it might feel like in the moment. This is where the distinction between pain and suffering becomes so powerful. The Stoics remind us that we can't control every obstacle life throws at us, but we can control our judgments about those obstacles. And often, it's those judgments, not the events themselves, that determine how much we suffer. Let's take an even more profound example. Imagine someone who loses their job. The initial pain of realizing you no longer have that steady income or daily purpose is natural. But what happens next is where the Stoic perspective comes in. One person might spiral into thoughts like, "This is the worst thing that's ever happened to me," or "I'll never recover from this." That's suffering. Another person might think, "This is difficult, but it's also an opportunity for a fresh start." Same event, two completely different experiences, and the difference isn't in what happened but in how it's perceived. The Stoics teach us to question these automatic judgments. Is the situation as catastrophic as it seems? Are the fears and assumptions you're attaching to it actually true? By separating the event from your interpretation of it, you take back control of your emotional state. You stop being a victim of external circumstances and start becoming the author of your own experience. So, what about you? The next time you're faced with something frustrating, stressful, or even heartbreaking, ask yourself, Am I reacting to the event itself or to the story I'm creating about it? This shift in perspective could be the first step in freeing yourself from unnecessary suffering. And as Marcus Aurelius reminds us, you have the power to change your perspective at any moment. Let's take a closer look at why the Stoics believe that it's not the events themselves, but your judgments about them that create suffering. This idea is central to Stoic philosophy, and at its heart lies a lesson from Epictetus. He taught that there are two categories of things in life, those that are within our control and those that are not. Epictetus argued that our judgments, choices, and reactions are 100% within our control, while external events, like other people's opinions, actions, or random occurrences, are not. The problem, he said, arises when we forget this distinction and invest all of our energy trying to control what we can't. Or worse, when we let things outside our control dictate our inner peace. Consider this: you receive criticism at work. Maybe a coworker questions your ability or makes a comment about a mistake you made. The criticism itself is neutral, it's just words. But what happens next depends entirely on your interpretation. If you immediately react with thoughts like, "They think I'm incapable," or "I'm such a failure," you've attached meaning to the event, meaning that sparks anger, embarrassment, or even shame. You've handed over control of your emotions to someone else's words. But here's the thing: those judgments, those narratives, are completely within your control to change. Epictetus would say, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Instead of letting the criticism define you or dictate your mood, you can pause and examine your judgment. Was the criticism valid? Is it an opportunity to learn? Or is it just someone else's opinion that may not even reflect reality? By detaching from your initial reactive judgment and choosing a deliberate response, you regain your sense of control. You stop suffering, not because the criticism disappears, but because you've chosen not to let it dominate your internal state. Let's break this idea down even further with another practical example. Imagine you're walking down the street and someone you know walks past without saying hello. You might immediately assume they're upset with me, or I must have done something wrong. Those interpretations could lead to anxiety, insecurity, or even resentment. But what if you reframed the situation? Maybe that person just didn't see you, or maybe they were preoccupied with their own thoughts. The Stoics remind us to step back in moments like these and remember, the event is neutral, but the judgment you attach to it determines your emotional experience. You have the power to change the story you're telling yourself. This practice of questioning and reframing your judgments isn't easy. It takes self-awareness and practice, but it's incredibly freeing. When you stop reacting automatically and start responding intentionally, you put yourself back in the driver's seat of your life. Think of it as building a mental buffer between the event and your emotional state. That buffer gives you the space to choose a response that aligns with your values rather than being swept away by knee-jerk emotions. So, how can you start applying this in your life? The next time something triggers you, whether it's a comment, an inconvenience, or a disappointment, pause and ask yourself, what judgment am I making about this situation? Is it helpful? Is it accurate? Could I choose a different way to see this? By doing this, you begin to practice what the Stoics called the art of living. You train yourself to detach from reactive judgments and take full ownership of your emotional state. Because as Epictetus taught, while you can't control what happens around you, you can absolutely control how you respond, and that's where your true power lies. Let's talk about two powerful forces that the Stoics believed were at the root of much of our suffering: desire and aversion. Think about it. How often do we find ourselves unhappy because we're chasing something we don't have, or because we're consumed by the fear of losing something we already hold dear? According to the Stoics, these two forces, our craving for what we lack and our dread of what we don't want, are the primary drivers of internal turmoil. And unless we learn to manage them, they can keep us trapped in a constant cycle of disappointment and anxiety. Seneca, one of the great Stoic thinkers, offered profound insights on this topic. He wrote, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more who is poor." What Seneca is pointing out here isn't about material wealth alone, it's about a mindset. When we fixate on acquiring something, whether it's money, status, possessions, or even someone's approval, we place our happiness outside of ourselves. We convince ourselves that we can't be content until we have that thing, and as a result, we're never truly at peace. The moment we achieve one desire, another pops up in its place, leaving us perpetually chasing the next thing and the next and the next. Now let's look at the flip side, aversion. Aversion comes from our fear of discomfort, difficulty, or loss. We recoil from the things we think will make us unhappy, and we spend a great deal of time and energy avoiding them. But here's the irony: the more we resist or fear something, the more power it has over us. Imagine being so afraid of failure that you avoid taking risks altogether. Or being so terrified of rejection that you never put yourself out there. In both cases, your aversion isn't protecting you, it's keeping you stuck. The Stoics believed that by fearing what you cannot control or avoiding challenges altogether, you end up suffering twice, once from the fear itself and again from the missed opportunities for growth. Now let's fast forward to our modern lives. How does this idea of desire and aversion show up today? One clear example is consumer culture. Everywhere we look, we're bombarded with messages telling us we need more, buy this, get that, upgrade to this newer version. It's a constant loop designed to make us feel like we're never enough until we acquire the next shiny thing. Social media takes this even further, showing us curated snapshots of people living their best lives, making us crave experiences, possessions, and lifestyles that aren't even real. The result, we become trapped in a cycle of comparison and dissatisfaction, always wanting more and feeling less fulfilled as a result. But what's the solution? Seneca advised us to moderate our desires and to ask ourselves, is this thing I want truly necessary for my happiness? The truth is, most of the things we think we need to be happy aren't needs at all, they're wants. And when we chase after them, we often overlook the abundance that's already within our reach. The same logic applies to aversion. The Stoics encouraged us to face our fears head-on, to practice what they called voluntary discomfort. This meant deliberately putting themselves in situations they feared, sleeping on the floor, eating simple meals, or imagining life without their most prized possessions. Why? To remind themselves that the things they were so afraid of losing weren't the sources of happiness in the first place. By confronting discomfort, they stripped it of its power and learned to live with greater resilience. So now it's your turn to reflect. What's one thing you've been chasing recently, convinced that it will make you happy? And on the flip side, what's something you've been avoiding because you fear it will bring discomfort or unhappiness? Are these things truly worth the mental energy you're investing in them? When we take a step back and examine our desires and aversions, we begin to see how much of our suffering is self-created and how much freedom we could gain by letting go of the unnecessary. Let's dive into one of the most common traps that leads to suffering, the pursuit of external validation. Whether it's wanting praise from your boss, approval from your friends, or likes and followers on social media, many of us rely on others to measure our self-worth. When someone compliments us, we feel good. When they criticize or ignore us, we feel unworthy or upset. But here's the problem: if your sense of value depends on external approval, on something you can't fully control, you're setting yourself up for endless frustration. The Stoics believed that true self-worth comes from within, not from the opinions of others. Epictetus frequently warned against placing your happiness in the hands of external factors. He said, if you wish to improve, be content to appear clueless or stupid in extraneous matters. Don't wish to be seen as wise, and if some regard you as important, distrust yourself. What Epictetus is saying here is profound. He's reminding us that chasing after the appearance of being admired or respected is a distraction. It pulls us away from what really matters, living in alignment with our own values. To illustrate this point, let's turn to a historical example. Consider the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, one of the most powerful men of his time, who was constantly surrounded by praise and flattery. It would have been easy for him to get swept up in his status and the adoration of others, but he actively resisted it. In his personal journal, which we now know as *Meditations*, he repeatedly reminded himself to focus on his character and not what others thought of him. In one passage he wrote, "I have often wondered how it is that every man loves himself more than all the rest of men, but sets less value on his own opinions of himself than on the opinions of others." Even as emperor, Marcus recognized the danger of letting external validation dictate his sense of worth. He knew that a life driven by the need for approval is ultimately unstable because those opinions can change in an instant. Now, let's consider this ancient wisdom in today's world. Nowhere is the pursuit of external validation more apparent than on social media. Think about the last time you posted something. How often did you check back for likes, comments, or shares? Maybe you felt a little buzz of happiness when the numbers were high, or maybe you felt disappointed or even invisible if there was little response. This constant feedback loop can make it feel like your worth is tied to the reactions of others. But here's the truth: those metrics don't measure your value as a person. They're fleeting, arbitrary, and often based on shallow or surface-level impressions. The Stoics would argue that the pursuit of likes and external approval leaves you vulnerable. You've essentially handed over your peace of mind to something you can't control: other people's opinions. And as Epictetus points out, what's outside your control should never be the source of your happiness. Instead, he encourages us to focus on what is within our control: our actions, our character, and how we choose to live. When you align with your own values and judge yourself by your own standards, something powerful happens. You free yourself. This isn't to say that seeking connection or feedback is inherently bad. Humans are social beings, and it's natural to want to belong. But the problem arises when we make external validation the foundation of our self-worth. The Stoics remind us that we already have everything we need within ourselves for a meaningful, fulfilling life. If you're living with integrity, treating others with kindness, and striving to grow, that's enough. You don't need other people's applause to validate that. So the next time you find yourself chasing approval, whether it's through social media, a compliment, or someone else's acknowledgement, pause for a moment. Ask yourself, am I living in alignment with my values? Do I really need this external validation, or am I enough as I am? These questions can help you shift your focus inward, where your true worth resides, and break free from the trap of unnecessary suffering. Because, as the Stoics knew, your value isn't something others can give you. It's something you already possess. Let's talk about one of the most liberating and practical ideas from Stoic philosophy: the dichotomy of control. At its core, this concept is about recognizing the crucial difference between what's within our power and what isn't. The Stoics believed that much of our suffering comes from misunderstanding this distinction, from wasting energy trying to control things that are, by their very nature, beyond our reach. Here's how it works. According to the Stoics, there are only two things truly under your control: your thoughts and your actions. Everything else, other people's opinions, the economy, the weather, even the eventual outcome of your efforts, falls outside this sphere of control. When you focus on what you can control, you reduce unnecessary stress and frustration. But when you obsess over things you can't control, it's like trying to push back the tide. No matter how hard you try, it only leads to exhaustion and suffering. Let's put this into a real-world context with an example many of us can relate to: job stress. Picture this: you've been working on a big project at work, pouring in extra hours and doing your best to make it a success. But as the deadline approaches, your boss seems unimpressed, your co-workers aren't pulling their weight, and you're feeling overwhelmed. In moments like this, it's easy to spiral into frustration or self-doubt. You might think, what if my boss hates my work? Or why can't my team just step up and help? These thoughts can become all-consuming, stealing your focus and adding layers of stress to an already difficult situation. But what would the Stoics say about this? They'd remind you to pause and ask yourself, what here is actually within my control? You can't control your boss's opinion. You can't control your co-worker's work ethic, and you certainly can't control the final result, no matter how hard you try. What you can control are your actions, the effort you put in, the quality of the work you produce, and your attitude throughout the process. If you shift your focus to these controllable factors, you let go of unnecessary worry about things that are out of your hands. You might still care about the outcome, but you won't be consumed by it. Instead, you'll find clarity because your energy is being channeled towards something productive, what you can actually influence. The Stoics weren't suggesting that you stop caring about external results or that you detach completely from the world around you. Instead, they taught the importance of caring with detachment. In other words, do your very best in any situation, but recognize that the outcome isn't entirely up to you. This mindset doesn't mean you're passive. In fact, it empowers you to act with greater freedom and purpose. When your peace of mind isn't tied to external results, you can approach challenges with calm and resilience. Marcus Aurelius captured this beautifully when he wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." Think about the strength he's referring to. It's the strength of knowing that no matter what happens around you, your internal world, your thoughts, your perspective, your choices is yours to command. That's an unshakable kind of power, the kind that allows you to face life's uncertainties without falling apart. So how can we apply this practically? The next time you feel yourself getting overwhelmed by external pressures, take a moment to pause and reflect. Am I focusing on something I can control? If not, how can I redirect my energy to something I can influence? It's a simple but profound exercise that can transform the way you navigate even the toughest situations. By letting go of the illusion of control over external events, you'll discover the serenity and focus to handle whatever comes your way. And in doing so, you'll experience one of the greatest teachings of Stoicism, that your inner peace isn't determined by the world around you, it's determined by how you choose to respond. Let's explore another key source of suffering that the Stoics were keenly aware of, our tendency to live anywhere but the present moment. How often do we find ourselves caught up in regret about the past or anxiety about the future? Maybe you replay an awkward conversation from last week over and over in your mind, wondering what you could have said differently, or perhaps you lie awake at night worrying about what might go wrong tomorrow. These mental patterns can pull us away from the here and now, amplifying our stress and unhappiness. But the Stoics understood something powerful: peace of mind can only be found in the present. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, put it simply: confine yourself to the present. It's a deceptively simple idea, but one that holds immense power. The past, it's gone. No amount of dwelling on it can change what's already happened. The future, it hasn't arrived yet, and worrying about it doesn't grant you any control over what's to come. The present moment, however, that's where your life is happening. It's where your actions, your decisions, and your ability to create meaning reside. When you lose sight of the present, you lose access to the only time and space where you have any real power. Think about a time when you've been lost in thought while doing something simple, maybe having a conversation, eating a meal, or walking outside. Instead of being fully engaged, your mind drifted elsewhere, replaying past mistakes or constructing worst-case scenarios for the future. Did that mental detour actually help you, or did it just create unnecessary tension, pulling you away from what was happening right in front of you? For most of us, these lapses into regret or worry do little more than drain our emotional energy and prevent us from appreciating the present. The Stoics weren't just philosophers, they were also deeply practical thinkers. They didn't ask us to ignore the past or neglect planning for the future, but rather to engage with those things deliberately, not obsessively. If something can be learned from the past, great, learn the lesson and move on. If preparation for the future is required, do what you can now and let the rest go. Their advice wasn't about avoiding responsibility. It was about focusing your mental and emotional attention on what's actionable in the moment, because that's how you stay grounded and effective. In this way, Stoicism aligns closely with the modern practice of mindfulness, the art of staying present and fully engaged with the here and now. Mindfulness teaches us to observe our thoughts without judgment, to notice when our mind starts drifting to the past or future, and to gently bring it back to the present. This practice not only reduces suffering but also increases clarity and focus, allowing us to respond to life's challenges with greater intention. So how can you bring more of this present focus into your daily life? Here's a simple exercise inspired by both Stoic teachings and mindfulness practices. The next time you find yourself overwhelmed by thoughts of the past or future, pause and take 3 slow, deep breaths. As you do this, tune into what's happening right now. Notice your surroundings, the sensations in your body, or the task at hand. For example, if you're eating a meal, focus on the taste, texture, and smell of the food. If you're walking, pay attention to the rhythm of your steps or the feeling of the ground beneath your feet. This exercise helps anchor you in the present, breaking the cycle of rumination and worry. The Stoics believed that life was far too precious to spend it trapped in regret about yesterday or fear of tomorrow. By cultivating a present-focused mindset, you free yourself from unnecessary suffering and create space to fully experience the life you're living right now. As Marcus Aurelius reminds us, do every act of your life as though it were the last act of your life. When you truly embrace that idea, you begin to realize that the here and now is all you really have, and in that there is immense peace. Let's take a closer look at how our emotional reactions can turn minor events into major sources of suffering. Picture this: you're running errands and someone cuts you off in traffic. Instantly, your chest tightens, your jaw clenches, and frustration boils over. You might think, how dare they? People are so inconsiderate these days. That feeling lingers even after the moment has passed, and before you know it, your mood is ruined for hours. The actual event, a car merging into your lane, was over in seconds. But your emotional reaction, fueled by the story you told yourself about it, is what turned it into suffering. Seneca, the Roman philosopher known for his practical wisdom, had a lot to say about emotional reactions, especially anger. He believed that emotions like anger often make bad situations worse, and he called on us to question our impulses instead of letting them take control. Seneca wrote, "It is not that we are hurt, but that we consider ourselves to have been hurt that constitutes injury." In other words, it's not the event itself that harms us, it's the meaning we assign to it, the emotional weight we attach to it, and how we choose to respond. Let's go back to the traffic example. If you pause and examine the situation, what's actually happened? Someone merged in front of you. That's it. It might have been careless, but it's unlikely the driver even knew they upset you. So why let it ruin your peace of mind? The Stoics remind us that we have the power to decide how we interpret these moments. We can either choose to escalate our frustration or practice restraint and let it go. And as Seneca would argue, a moment of restraint could save us hours of unnecessary frustration. The problem with disproportionate emotional reactions is that they often have a snowball effect. One small inconvenience, spilling coffee, misplacing your keys, or dealing with a grumpy cashier turns into a bad mood. From there, it's easy to carry that negativity into the rest of your day, snapping at loved ones or making rash decisions. This cycle can feel automatic, but the Stoics believed it's entirely within our power to interrupt. The key is awareness. Here's where Seneca's advice becomes practical. To control emotional impulses, we must first recognize them as they arise. The next time you feel anger, frustration, or any intense emotional reaction creeping in, pause for a moment and ask yourself, is this worth the cost of my peace of mind? This single question can create enough space between the event and your reaction to regain control. Instead of letting your emotions dictate your response, you're now in the driver's seat. Another effective tool is to reframe the situation. Imagine viewing that same traffic incident through a Stoic lens. Instead of thinking, that driver is so rude, you might say, maybe they didn't see me, or even, they could be in a rush to deal with an emergency. By reframing the event in a way that removes malice, you reduce its emotional grip on you. This doesn't mean you have to excuse bad behavior, but it does mean refusing to let it take control of your state of mind. Now ask yourself this: how do you typically respond to life's small inconveniences? Do you let them pile up and turn into frustration, or do you practice letting them go? Reflect for a moment on how much emotional energy you spend reacting to things that, in the grand scheme of life, are insignificant. Imagine how much lighter and freer you'd feel if you didn't let every minor annoyance take up space in your mind. This practice isn't about suppressing your emotions, it's about mastering them. And as the Stoics believed, learning to control your emotional impulses isn't just about reducing suffering, it's about reclaiming your inner peace. Let's talk about the role of expectations in our suffering. How often do you find yourself disappointed because something didn't go the way you thought it would? Maybe you set a personal goal to nail that big presentation at work, stick to a new workout routine, or finally reconnect with an old friend. You imagine it going perfectly and you start to count on that outcome. But then, reality doesn't match your expectations. The presentation falls flat, you skip a week of workouts, or your friend doesn't respond to your message. What happens next? Frustration, self-doubt, maybe even a sense of failure. But the Stoics would tell us that the problem isn't the outcome itself, it's the expectations we built around it. Epictetus put it bluntly: when you are offended at any man's fault, turn to yourself and study your own failings. Then you will forget your anger. This applies not just to our judgments of others, but to life in general. Often, our suffering is tied directly to the gap between what we expected to happen and what actually happened. The wider that gap, the greater the disappointment. The Stoics understood that holding rigid or unrealistic expectations is a surefire way to create unnecessary pain. Why? Because life is unpredictable. Outcomes are influenced by countless factors beyond our control. Expecting the universe or people to behave exactly as we want is like expecting the ocean to stop producing waves just because they're inconvenient. Let's take a closer look at how this plays out in daily life. Imagine you've been working hard for a promotion and feel certain it's yours. You've told yourself, I deserve this, it'll happen. But when the time comes, the position goes to someone else. Naturally, you feel crushed. Thoughts like, it's not fair, or I'm not appreciated, cycle through your mind and the disappointment grows. Now, it's normal to feel let down in moments like this, but the Stoics would encourage us to step back and ask, Was the pain caused by the event itself, or by the expectation that it had to go a certain way? The promotion wasn't promised, but in your mind it already belonged to you. That expectation, and not the event, is what turned a neutral outcome into suffering. So how do we avoid this? The Stoic answer isn't to stop caring or to give up on goals. It's to approach life with what they called a reservation, an acceptance that things may not go as planned. You do your best, you set your goals, but you remain open to the idea that the outcome may differ from your expectations. This shift in mindset doesn't mean giving up on hope or effort. It means balancing your aspirations with a grounding in reality. Let's bring in Seneca, who gives us another helpful perspective. He said, "Cease to hope and you will cease to fear." At first glance, this might sound pessimistic, but it's actually deeply practical. Seneca isn't saying we should abandon all hope. Rather, he's pointing out that clinging to specific outcomes creates a cycle of fear and anxiety. When you tie your happiness to a particular result, you constantly worry about losing it or not achieving it. By lowering your expectations not for yourself but for the things you can't fully control, you free yourself from that cycle. You can still work hard and hope for the best, but your inner peace won't depend on everything going perfectly. A great way to apply this in real life is to start small. The next time you face a situation, whether it's a project at work, a social event, or even something as simple as a weekend plan, remind yourself that things might not go exactly as you imagine. Say to yourself, "I'll put in my best effort, but I'll accept the outcome, whatever it may be." This doesn't lower your standards, it actually empowers you. You can approach life with confidence and resilience because you're no longer placing your happiness on something outside your control. When we let go of rigid expectations, we start to see life more clearly. Challenges become less overwhelming, other people's actions less frustrating, and setbacks less devastating. And in that, as the Stoics teach us, lies one of the keys to reducing unnecessary suffering: learning to align our expectations with the unpredictable nature of reality. Adversity is an inevitable part of life, but where many see hardship as a reason to despair, the Stoics saw something entirely different: an opportunity. To the Stoics, adversity wasn't something to avoid or fear. It was something to embrace, because it's through challenges that we grow stronger, wiser, and more virtuous. Marcus Aurelius, who faced monumental pressures as a Roman emperor, reminded himself of this constantly. One of his most famous teachings is, "The impediment to action advances action." What stands in the way becomes the way. In other words, the obstacle isn't just something to overcome, it's the path itself. Let's bring this idea to life with a story of resilience. One of the greatest modern examples of someone embodying this Stoic principle is Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist. Frankl endured unimaginable suffering in a concentration camp, losing his family and his freedom. He faced the kind of adversity that would break most people, but instead of letting his suffering defeat him, Frankl used it as a way to discover profound meaning. He observed that even in the harshest conditions, those who could find purpose, whether in helping others, holding on to hope, or maintaining their inner dignity, were more likely to survive emotionally and spiritually. His famous book, *Man's Search for Meaning*, is essentially a Stoic masterpiece in practice. Frankl's message echoes Marcus Aurelius's teaching. Adversity is not just something to endure, it's a proving ground for inner strength. But how does this apply to our everyday lives? Thankfully, most of us will never face challenges on the scale that Frankl did. Yet we still encounter difficulties, whether it's the loss of a loved one, financial challenges, heartbreak, or even smaller frustrations like dealing with failure or rejection. The Stoics would remind us that every one of these moments is an opportunity to practice virtue. Virtue, to the Stoics, wasn't just a lofty idea, It was something we could embody through specific qualities like courage, patience, self-control, and justice. Imagine, for instance, that you've been passed over for a promotion at work. It's natural to feel disappointed or even frustrated. But what if you used this moment to practice patience and humility? What if, instead of reacting with bitterness or resentment, you chose to see the setback as an opportunity to improve, to become better at your craft, and to demonstrate resilience in the face of disappointment? This isn't about ignoring the difficulty of the situation or pretending it doesn't hurt. It's about transforming your reaction into something that builds your character rather than diminishes it. Marcus Aurelius often framed challenges as a way to strengthen the soul. He saw difficult people, setbacks, and hardships as training for the mind, much like weights are for the body. In Meditations, he wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. By focusing on how you respond to adversity rather than the adversity itself, you gain control not only over your emotions but over your growth as a person." Even in the smallest struggle, you can practice this mindset. Instead of seeing a difficult coworker as a source of irritation, see them as an opportunity to practice patience and kindness. Instead of viewing a breakup as just heartbreak, see it as a chance to cultivate independence and self-reflection. Instead of letting failure crush your confidence, view it as a necessary step in learning and improving. Every challenge, big or small, becomes a moment to fortify your inner strength. So the next time you face adversity, remember the wisdom of Marcus Aurelius: the obstacle is the way. It's not there to derail you. It's there to teach you, to make you stronger, and to reveal the depth of your character. Difficulties aren't something to fear. They are opportunities to practice the virtues that will carry you through life with resilience and purpose. Because in the end, it's through adversity that we become our best selves. Let's explore a powerful Stoic practice that can fundamentally change the way you approach challenges in life: voluntary discomfort. This exercise might sound counterintuitive at first. Why would anyone willingly put themselves in uncomfortable or inconvenient situations? But to the Stoics, this practice was essential for building resilience and reducing the fear of suffering. After all, many of our struggles in life don't come from the hardship itself, but from the overwhelming anxiety about what might happen or how we'll cope if it does. By exposing yourself to discomfort in a controlled way, you train your mind to become less reactive and more adaptable when life throws real challenges your way. Seneca, the Roman philosopher, put it beautifully when he wrote, "Set aside a certain number of days during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress, saying to yourself all the while, 'Is this the condition that I feared?'" What Seneca is inviting us to do here is simple but profound. He's asking us to confront the things we typically avoid, whether it's physical hardship, material scarcity, or even social awkwardness, and to realize that more often than not, they're nowhere near as unbearable as we imagine. By practicing living with less or enduring small difficulties intentionally, we begin to strip those fears of their power. So how does this look in practice? You don't need to move to a mountaintop or endure extreme hardship to try this. It's about intentionally seeking out small, manageable discomforts in your daily life. For example, you might skip a luxurious meal and eat something simple instead, like plain rice or beans. Or you could go a day without your favorite comforts, like coffee, social media, or your cozy sweater on a cold day. If you're feeling particularly adventurous, you might try something like taking a cold shower, walking instead of driving, or spending a weekend living minimally without TV, your favorite snacks, or other conveniences you rely on. The point isn't to punish yourself, it's to show yourself that you can handle life without these comforts, and in doing so, reduce your attachment to them. Here's why this practice is so powerful. It rewires the way you think about suffering. So much of our fear is rooted in uncertainty. This idea that if I lost this job, if I didn't have this luxury, if people didn't approve of me, I wouldn't survive. Voluntary discomfort challenges that mindset directly. It shows you through direct experience that you're stronger than you think. You learn that you can survive on less, endure frustration, or handle awkwardness without falling apart. And with that realization, your fears begin to shrink. The next time you face an unexpected hardship, whether it's a financial setback, a challenging relationship, or a change in circumstances, you'll be better equipped to handle it because you've already practiced discomfort in a safe and controlled way. Let's think about this in broader terms. Imagine someone who's deeply afraid of losing their financial stability. They worry constantly about what would happen if they couldn't afford the comforts they've grown used to. Now imagine that person spends a few days once a month living as minimally as possible, eating simple meals, turning off unnecessary luxuries, and sticking to a strict budget. Over time, what do you think happens? Not only do they start to realize they can function perfectly well with less, but they might even begin to feel less dependent on those comforts altogether. This doesn't just build resilience, it also brings a kind of freedom, because the fear of losing what they have no longer controls them. The beauty of voluntary discomfort is that it fits into any lifestyle. You don't have to upend your life or take drastic steps to try it. Start small, with something you know you rely on a little too much, a daily indulgence, a convenience, or even a habit that keeps you in your comfort zone. Give it up for a short time and see how you feel. Notice the thoughts and emotions that come up. Remind yourself, as Seneca did, is this the condition that I feared? More often than not, you'll find that the answer is no, that the discomfort isn't as bad as it seemed in your mind. This practice isn't about deprivation for its own sake. It's about strengthening your ability to navigate life with grace, no matter what it throws at you. By practicing voluntary discomfort, you're not only preparing yourself for harder days ahead, you're also learning to appreciate what you already have and to live with greater confidence and resilience. Life will have its challenges, but with exercises like these, you'll be ready to meet them with calm and strength. The Stoics believed that the foundation of a meaningful and peaceful life begins with taking full responsibility for your own mindset. This idea can feel both empowering and daunting. Empowering because it puts the control of your inner life entirely in your hands, and daunting because it means there's no one else to blame when things go wrong. Epictetus, a former slave turned philosopher, articulated this beautifully when he said, "You are not disturbed by the things themselves, but by your opinions about them." What he's telling us is that it's not the events of the world that dictate our state of mind, it's the way we choose to think about those events, and the key word here is choose. Taking responsibility for your mindset starts with recognizing that, while you can't control external events, you have complete authority over your thoughts and reactions. Imagine a situation where someone criticizes you in front of others. Your initial reaction might be embarrassment, anger, or even self-doubt. But here's the Stoic perspective. The criticism itself isn't what causes those feelings. It's your interpretation of the event, your belief that the criticism reflects poorly on you or diminishes your worth, that leads to emotional turmoil. Take away that interpretation and the emotional charge disappears. The event, the word spoken, remains the same, but your reaction can change entirely. This doesn't mean ignoring or suppressing emotions. The Stoics weren't advocating for emotionlessness. Instead, they emphasized the power of examining your emotional reactions and uncovering the beliefs driving them. When you feel anger, fear, or sadness, you don't just dive headfirst into those feelings. You pause and ask, why am I reacting this way? What story am I telling myself about this situation? Is that story true, or am I adding unnecessary suffering to the event? Epictetus compared the mind to a fortress. He believed that, just as a fortress guards against external invaders, we must guard the door to our inner life, allowing only thoughts and judgments that serve us to come through. He famously said, "No one can harm you unless you consent. You are the master of your inner life." But this mastery requires practice and vigilance. It means being willing to hold yourself accountable for how you respond to life rather than blaming circumstances, other people, or even luck. Think about how often we give away this power. How often do we blame a bad day on traffic, an unkind remark, or an unexpected setback? In doing so, we hand control of our emotional state to things entirely beyond our influence. The Stoics challenge us to reclaim that control by taking ownership of how we think about and respond to the world. Let's bring this closer to home with a practical example. Imagine coming home after a long day, only to find that a family member or roommate has left the kitchen in chaos, dishes piled up, food scraps left everywhere. Your immediate thought might be, "They have no respect for my time or the space we share." That thought leads to frustration and possibly even a full-blown argument. But pause for a moment and reflect. Is that interpretation helpful? Is it the only way to view the situation? Perhaps they were in a rush, or maybe they simply aren't as mindful of cleanliness as you are. What would change if, instead of jumping to judgment, you reframed your interpretation or chose to respond calmly and constructively? In that moment, you're practicing what the Stoics teach, ownership of your mindset, which allows you to handle the situation with grace instead of letting it control you. Now, this isn't easy. Being the master of your inner life requires consistent effort and self-awareness. It's not something you achieve overnight, but with practice, you'll notice a shift. Small frustrations lose their grip on you, external events feel less overwhelming, and your overall sense of calm and control begins to grow. So, here's a question to reflect on as we wrap up this idea. How much responsibility are you currently taking for your thoughts and emotional reactions? Are you the master of your mindset, or are there areas where you're still handing that control to external circumstances? The answer might surprise you, but it can also be the first step toward reclaiming your inner peace. As we come to the end of this exploration of Stoic wisdom, let's take a moment to reflect on the principles we've uncovered. The Stoics taught us that suffering doesn't come from the events of life themselves, but from how we interpret those events. Whether it's our judgments, our expectations, or the misplaced focus on things beyond our control, we are often the ones who create our own emotional turbulence. The good news is that by understanding this, we reclaim the power to change it. We began by examining how our judgments shape our experience. A situation itself is neutral. Traffic jams, criticism, or setbacks don't inherently carry meaning. It's the story we attach to them, the layers of judgment we pile on, that create suffering. By learning to challenge and reframe our automatic reactions, we can strip away unnecessary pain and respond with clarity and calmness. Next, we explored the role of desire and aversion. Many of us are caught in a cycle of craving what we don't have and fearing what we might lose. The Stoics showed us how these attachments can trap us, making us feel powerless and perpetually dissatisfied. But by moderating our desires and facing discomfort head-on, we free ourselves from being ruled by fear or longing. We also discussed the importance of recognizing what's within our control and what isn't, a cornerstone of Stoic thought. When we focus on our actions, our thoughts, and our choices, rather than worrying about external outcomes, we step into our own power. Life becomes less overwhelming because we stop expending energy on things we can't change. Finally, we turn to the practice of living in the present moment. The past and the future, as the Stoics remind us, are beyond our reach, but right now, this moment is where life happens. By embracing the present and letting go of unnecessary regrets and anxieties, we free ourselves to act with purpose and gratitude. These ideas aren't just abstract philosophy, they're tools for daily life. Each time you pause before reacting, each time you accept an outcome without resentment, or each time you face a challenge with courage instead of fear, you're practicing Stoicism. It's not about being perfect or emotionless, it's about taking small, intentional steps to reduce unnecessary suffering and cultivate inner peace. As Marcus Aurelius wisely said, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Let this quote serve as a reminder that you already hold the key to transforming your experience. It's not about controlling the world, it's about mastering how you respond to it. Now, we'd love to hear from you. What's one insight from today's video that resonated with you? Have you experienced situations where reframing your thoughts helped you find peace? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective might inspire someone who's just beginning their Stoic journey. Let's learn and grow together as a community of thinkers and seekers, applying these timeless lessons to our modern lives. Thank you for joining this exploration of Stoicism. Remember, the path to peace and strength begins within. Until next time, embrace every moment as an opportunity to grow.